Hey, welcome back to another dispatch from Holly McKay. Today, we are going to go to Sudan, which is in conflict and turmoil even as we speak. Holly, you have studied this area of the world for quite some time. Give us your take.
Well, first of all, it's just incredibly heartbreaking to see another absolutely senseless war. When this broke out the beginning of last week, I don't know, it's exhausting because essentially this is really a conflict between two men who are two military men vying for power. In a country that we all had once hoped a few years ago that would transition to a democracy, which it was really supposed to do. But again, it just shows you the level of power and corruption that really exists in so many places. And it's exhausting. Already, hundreds of people are being killed, thousands injured, tens of thousands have had to flee their home. There's been efforts for a ceasefire, which really haven't amounted to much. And there's absolutely no point to it. And that, I think, it's just a point to drive home as to why it becomes so frustrating sometimes to work in war, and um, it's so hard for I think to maintain people's attention when this continues to happen. And I can totally understand that, but at the same time, just have to look at the innocent people that are kind of caught in it, and we can't forget them. But I do definitely um, really understand the frustrations people have, when trying to find solutions to these problems, because no matter how much money is thrown at something. I mean, you look at the looting that's happening, the aid trucks, the World Food Program aid trucks that have sort of been taken over and looted, and it's really heartbreaking, because the people that really need those supplies are not receiving it, and a lot of the aid groups that are there can't resume operations while there is this sort of huge conflict right now happening in Khartoum. So. Um, it's being tired but not tired enough. So I think that's just an important point. And as I said, it's essentially a fight between two men. So basically, you have their military commander, who's Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and he sort of runs the state military, if you will. And then there is the Rapid Support Forces, also known as the RSF, and they're led by a Darfur native, General Mohammed Hamdan Daglo. He's better known as Hamdati. And so basically, what was supposed to happen at this point, being 4 years since Omar Bashir was toppled from power. So Omar Bashir was a dictator of Sudan for really 30 years, and committed so many atrocities. And so these sort of men work together, because the RSF, while it's not an official military, it is sponsored by the military. It's sort of a paramilitary that works in conjunction with the military. And so basically 4 years ago, these men worked together. They toppled Omar Bashir. So he is sort of still sitting in jail, but said to be kind of orchestrating things behind the scenes a little bit. And then 2 years ago, what was supposed to happen? They came in and toppled basically the Transitional Civilian Authority. And then what was really supposed to happen at this point is that the military was supposed to hand over power, and that the civilians were supposed to be able to sort of transition Sudan into something of a democracy, and have their first ever really free and fair elections in a long time. But of course, that hasn't happened. And so you've got two men that are sort of trying to continue their control, and are using whatever weapons are at their disposal. No regard for any sort of human life around them, just to kind of fight back and try to gain control of the capital. And so it's absolutely senseless.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's not like we haven't seen this before. Um, so is essentially going back in the history of the area. Is essentially what happened is that old tribal rivalries have resurfaced in the aftermath of all this effort that was made by the world to invest in this country.
Absolutely. And you saw in sort of 2017 under the Trump administration that there was an effort to sort of bring Sudan back into the kind of the fold. Sanctions were sort of taken away, and there was hope that there would be this sort of economic boom. But of course, with corruption and other things, that never happened. Ordinary Sudanese people really never saw any benefit to their lives. But really, in particular, I think. one thing that never went away, and again, this also has huge origins in what's happening today, is what's happening in Darfur, which is quite far from Khartoum, the capital, a part of Sudan. If we remember 20 years ago, it was designated a genocide. And then again, that was you had the Janjaweed, which is essentially, the Rapid Support Forces, which is the paramilitary, just committing atrocious sort of things, and they were sort of orchestrated by Omar Bashir, really committing sort of atrocious things, and again, tribal fighting. It's awful what's sort of been through. And then I think when Darfur really sort of faded from the headlines over the past 2 decades, as any conflict does, I think people just assume that went away, but it hasn't. And for the past few years, you've seen this flare up again, especially the RSF forces really asserting their authority in this part of the country. Still tens of thousands of people that fleeing their homes with continued violence. The sexual violence against the women is really unfathomable. Aid workers not being able to get in. The UN sort of withdrew its peacekeepers at the end of 2020, and immediately things got even worse. So, the UN sort of were part of an agreement that was supposed to be, they withdraw, and there was supposed to be peace in the region, which of course never happened. So I think also a big part of it is when you don't see accountability for problems, when you don't see someone like Omar Bashir, who was indicted by the International Criminal Court, but nothing ever happened. He was never sort of held accountable to the crimes that he'd committed against Sudanese people. And in addition to that, you just have a sort of resentment. And I think we can think wars are over, and I say this time and time again, but when there is no accountability, when nobody is ever sort of held responsible for what happened, it breeds resentment. And what happens when you breed resentment is you then breed people to want to start their own conflicts, to be want certain degrees of power, to sort of seek revenge in very different ways. And I think Sudan is sort of very much a casualty of that.
Hmm. Well, I mean, looking at this part of the world, Africa in particular, and its long history of repetitions of the same tribal wars over and over and over again. You think anything different will happen this time, or is this just a continuing repetition of a long history of this kind of turmoil in this part of the world? Or actually, what do you think can be done to end that cycle? Because this is a repetition of 20 years ago happening right in front of our faces right now.
I mean, eventually, one of these two men is going to win, whether that is the military commander or the RSF commander. Eventually, who knows how many lives it will cost in the meantime? Who knows how much destruction will happen to a country that's already poor? So we don't know how long it will last. And eventually somebody is going to sort of come out as the victor. But my fear is that you have this same cycle again, where there is no accountability, and there is no real sense of stable power. And obviously the sort of the hopes that we all had for Sudan to be something of a democracy. It's the second largest country in Africa. The hopes that that would become, something of a democratic place to live, only if only in the sense that people would be able to elect their leader, and that it wouldn't be under a military dictatorship as it has been for so many decades. I think those are pretty much dashed. And sadly, Sudan sort of joins the ranks of many Arab majority countries that have fallen victim to that. And many Sudanese people 4 years ago, they rose up, they wanted Bashar out, they sort of did all the things that we need people in these countries to do if they want to instigate change. But what happens is the aftermath of it is just always such a vacuum suck for power. We've seen it in Syria, we saw it in Libya, we see it again here in Sudan, and it's a huge shame. And also what comes with that is a certain sense of jadedness that comes from the rest of the world. How much can the international community invest? How much can aid groups, solicit donations to help people in need when this just continues to happen over and over and over again? And there just doesn't seem to be light in the tunnel. And someone as a war reporter, I find it just incredibly disheartening and frustrating, because we want to help, we want to support those people in need, but there just doesn't seem to be an end to it. and I wish I had all the answers, and I don't think anybody has the answers, because it comes down to human nature, really, and this sort of um, this vying that so many countries in the world have for power, for money, for to kind of to rule. And often these are personal grievances, and unfortunately entire countries suffer from personal grievances.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm one of those people that's finding it very, very hard to stay positive with the repetitions of these things all over the world. Um, it is difficult. Well, keep track of this, Holly. I mean, you're a fountain of knowledge when it comes to what's happening behind the scenes and deeper beyond what is covered in 30 seconds in mainstream media. So, thank you for that, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. And please read the article. I really sort of detail some very personal takes on Darfur and what's happening, and hopefully give a bit of a stronger sense um, of why the situation is what it is.
There you go. Please do, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Dennis.